Welcome to the deep dive, where we really try to cut through the noise.
Get to what matter.
Exactly. And today we're diving into something from Schleswig-Holstein in Germany. It sounds, well, pretty straightforwardly positive on the surface.
Yeah, those headlines, right?
Italy. You've probably seen them.
Okay.
Schleswig-Holstein generates around 30 terawatt hours of electricity a year. But here's the kicker. It only consumes about 10 terawatt hours.
And just so you get a sense of scale, 30 terawatt hours, that's 30 billion kilowatt hours. A massive amount of energy.
It sounds like this huge surplus, doesn't it? Like they're swimming in green energy.
It really does, on the surface. But, our mission today is to dig a bit deeper than that.
Okay.
We want to ask, is Schleswig-Holstein really experiencing a genuine electricity surplus? Or is there maybe a kind of hidden shortage under those big, impressive numbers?
Right.
So we're going to try and take you beyond those simple aggregated figures, uncover a reality that's, well, a lot more nuanced.
So the idea is to show how even seemingly correct numbers can be used or maybe misinterpreted in a wrong way.
Precisely. Leading to pretty significant misunderstandings about energy supply and demand, especially, when we're talking about renewables.
Got it. And to help us navigate this whole energy puzzle, we're leaning heavily on an analysis by Professor Dr. Ing Holgerwater.
That's right. He uses a couple of key tools in his work. There's the Fraunhofer ISE's energy charts.
Which gives that big picture, Germany-wide view.
Exactly, energy landscape stuff.
Okay.
And then there's the SHNet's energy monitor.
The local one. Zooming right into Schleswig-Holstein.
Yeah, with incredible local detail. We'll get into both.
Okay, so let's unpack these numbers, the ones that sound so promising.
Yeah.
For 2024, Schleswig-Holstein, yes, generated about 30 terawatt hours.
Mm-hmm.
And get this, 27.3 terawatt hours of that renewable energy fed into the grid.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a massive 91.2% renewable share of the net fed energy. Total generation, including, conventional stuff, was around 29.9 terawatt hours. Meanwhile, actual consumption, self-consumption by people and businesses there, was only about 9.7 megawatt hours, which, interestingly, was actually down 9.6% from 2023.
Interesting drop.
Yeah. So crunching all that suggests Schleswig-Holstein was supplying something like 227% of its own consumption and achieved 75% self-sufficiency in terms of annual hours.
I mean, those numbers do sound fantastic. Almost too good to be true.
That's what I'm thinking. My gut tells me there's a but coming. What's the hidden catch here?
You're right to feel that but. They are fantastic if you only look at the annual totals. But here's the thing. Here's why these aggregated numbers, total kilowatts, GWH, TWH per year, they're just not sufficient. They don't tell the whole story for a dynamic supply situation.
Why not? What are they missing?
Well, they completely fail to account for two really crucial elements. First, temporal correlation. That's basically when electricity is generated versus when it's actually consumed.
The timing.
Exactly. And second, local grid limitations. Can the grid actually handle the power where it's made and get it to where it's needed?
I see. So these big numbers don't tell you if the power is generated, at the right time or in the right place.
Precisely. It's a bit like having a fridge absolutely packed with food, but you only get hungry when the fridge door is locked shut. You technically have the food, the total amount is there, but it's just not available when you actually need it.
That makes sense. So if it's not just about piling up terawatt hours, what does Professor Waters say is the fundamental truth we need to keep in mind? How energy actually works.
He puts it very, very clearly. He says, the physics will not follow political directives. The reverse makes sense and would be purposeful.
Ooh, okay. So physics dictates terms, not policy wishful thinking.
Pretty much. We can't just wish the energy to be where we want it when we want it. The laws of physics, they're unyielding. They dictate the reality of how energy flows and when it's available.
So how do we get a clearer picture of that reality then? You mentioned the energy charts from Fraunhofer IS.
Right. That's one powerful tool Professor Water uses. It lets you visualize Germany-wide electricity generation, consumption, imports, exports, all that stuff.
And on different timescales, like hourly, daily.
Yeah. Hourly, daily, monthly, yearly. It's really excellent for spotting those bigger national trends.
And what do those charts show? What's the crucial finding?
Well, what the energy charts reveal, quite starkly actually, is what Professor Water calls the poor performance of renewables, specifically wind and PV over longer periods.
Poor performance, but they generate so much energy overall.
Yes, but their nominal capacity, that's what they could theoretically produce if conditions were perfect all the time. That nominal capacity is, and I'm quoting here, only approximately reached in exceptional cases on extremely rare days.
Ah, okay. So mostly they're producing much less than their maximum potential.
Exactly. Over time, what really stands out is significant non-availability. For wind power, it's about 75% non-availability compared to its theoretical
Oh,
maximum.
75%.
Yep. And for solar, it's even higher, a staggering 90% non-availability.
90%. Wow.
Yeah. This ties directly into engineering terms like capacity factor and full load hours. Essentially, it's just the ratio, the actual energy produced over a year, say, compared to the absolute maximum it could have produced running flat out, 247.
So, like, if a 100 megawatt solar farm only averages 10 megawatts over the year, its capacity factor is just 10%.
You got it. That's the idea.
Okay. Now, to get even more granular, you mentioned the energy monitor from SHNets for Schleswig-Holstein specifically.
Right. This tool gets really detailed. It gives you a 15-minute resolution, shows how much electricity is generated, consumed, fed into the grid, right down to the community level.
15-minute intervals, that's pretty fine-grained.
It is very valuable for local analysis, but it also has its issues.
Oh, like what?
Well, one technical point is that it uses 15-minute energy values like kilowatt hours over 15 minutes instead of average power in kilowatts.
Why does that matter?
It can lead to misinterpretations. Think of it like this. Measuring energy over 15 minutes is like measuring the total amount of water that flowed into a bucket during that time. Measuring average power is like measuring the rate of flow, say, liters per second. You need the rate, the power, to understand the instantaneous balance between supply and demand at any given moment.
I see. So the way it measures could be misleading.
Potentially, yes. And there are other issues. For instance, there are documented data errors. In the municipality of Tarp, the monitor reported wind energy generation figures that were just, well, unrealistic.
How so?
Because, quite simply, there are no wind power plants existing or connected in that specific area.
Ooh, well, that's a problem.
It definitely shows how crucial accurate data and careful interpretation really are.
Okay, so this local data, even with potential flaws, reveals regional differences, right? You mentioned small communities often showing surpluses.
That's right. The Energy Monitor highlights these fascinating regional disparities. You take small communities, say Sieberstedt, Hurup, or Middle Angle. They often show continuous power surpluses, sometimes way over 100% self-sufficiency on paper.
And why is that? Lots of wind turbines or solar panels?
Typically, yes. Lots of wind or PV plants combined with relatively low local consumption, few people, not much industry.
Okay, but what about bigger places, like cities?
Well, that's where the picture flips. If you look at larger municipalities like Rendsburg or Neumünster, they almost always show a constant power deficit. They need to import power.
Because their local renewables can't cover their needs.
Often, yeah, their local renewable generation just can't fully cover their higher demand from industry, denser populations, and so on.
So it leads to this kind of counterintuitive idea.
Exactly. It's a counterintuitive conclusion. Having a really high surplus in a tiny community isn't necessarily a quality feature for the overall energy system.
Right, it might just mean the power isn't being used there.
Or it can't get out easily. It often indicates, as the source says, structural weaknesses in local use or grid connection. The power can't be used where it's generated, nor can it always be efficiently transported to where it is needed.
So what does this all mean for the bigger picture then, this mismatch?
It really highlights what Professor Water calls the temporal decoupling of generation and consumption. The timing is off.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. Look at the energy charts data from, say, January 2025. There was apparently abundant wind power being churned out in North Germany, where Schleswig-Holstein is. Lots of wind.
Okay.
But the major load centers, the big cities, the industrial areas, with high demand, they were located much further south in Germany.
So the power was in the north, but the demand was in the south.
Precisely. And the consequence of that mismatch is critical. The grid, the power lines, they hit bottlenecks. They couldn't transport all that power from north to south.
So what happened to the excess power in the north?
It led to curtailment. They basically had to shut down a perfectly good wind turbines or not use the electricity generated.
They had to waste it.
Effectively, yes. Or it led to dumping prices, where the price went negative because there was such an oversupply at the wrong place, wrong time.
Wow.
So, in essence, the electricity was generated, sure. But, quoting the source again, it was at the wrong time, at the wrong place, in unsuitable magnitudes, as well as in total not storable, thus not usable but expensive.
Expensive even though it wasn't used. How?
Well, the systems are built, the subsidies are often paid based on generation, not necessarily useful delivery, and managing these imbalances costs money too.
Hmm.
It's a bit like that historical Butterberg and Milksea thing in European agriculture back in the day. Remember that? Highly subsidized production.
Yeah, mountains of butter, lakes of milk.
Exactly. Production happened, but it was at the wrong time, wrong place, wrong quantity. Massive surpluses that couldn't really be used effectively.
So the analogy is that renewables can create similar unusable surpluses.
That's the argument here. The source concludes that renewable energies deliver always too much or always too little, never quite right. And managing that volatility, that mismatch, inevitably incurs extra costs and uses more resources. Avoidable costs, the source argues.
Okay, this really brings us to a crucial concept for any power grid stability. Secured power plant capacity. Can you define that clearly for us?
Sure. Simply put, secured power plant capacity is the part of the total installed power generation that you can reliably count on. It's the capacity that's available under normal operating conditions with a high statistical probability.
So the power you know will be there when you need it.
Pretty much, yeah. It's absolutely vital for ensuring the security and stability of the power supply. You need that baseline you can depend on.
Right. And how do we measure that? How do we know how secure different types of power plants are?
Well, engineers use something called power credit. These are basically typical percentages assigned to different power plant types based on their historical track record of availability.
Okay, so what are some typical power credits?
The comparisons are, frankly, quite startling. Looking at Table 2 in Professor Waters' analysis, nuclear power gets a power credit of around 95%.
Very reliable.
Extremely. Gas plants are around 93%, coal 91%, those efficient CCGT plants 85%, pumped hydro storage 80%. All pretty high, right? You can mostly count on them.
Yeah, those are solid numbers. What about renewables?
Well, that's where the story changes dramatically. Wind power comes in with a power credit of just 6%.
6%.
6%. And photovoltaic, solar power, gets a power credit of 0%.
Zero. How could it be zero? It generates huge amounts of energy. We saw the Schleswig-Holstein numbers.
It generates a lot of energy over time, yes. But remember, secured capacity is about reliable availability when needed, predictably.
And solar isn't predictable enough for that.
Exactly. For secured power plant capacity, you need something that's reliably there day or night, cloudy or sunny. Solar just isn't available at night, obviously, and its output swings wildly with cloud cover. Wind power also varies massively with wind speed.
So even though they produce a lot overall, you can't bank on them being there in any specific moment. You need guaranteed power.
That's the essence of it. According to this power credit metric, they can't be counted on for secured capacity in the same way a thermal plant like coal or gas or nuclear can be.
What about batteries? Battery storage, doesn't that help?
It helps, definitely. The source acknowledges that battery storage can be temporarily sufficient, but crucially, it's not permanently secured.
Meaning it can run out.
Right. It serves as an essential complement, absolutely. But it can't cover continuous large-scale demand or those prolonged periods of low wind and sun, what they call the Dunkel float. It's good for short-term smoothing, not long-term base supply.
And I assume there are standards and regulations around all this for wind, solar, batteries.
Oh, yes, absolutely. There are normative classifications, technical standards, things like VDE ARN 4105 in Germany, IEE 1547 internationally, specific standards for batteries like IEC 62 and 61N and VBEE AR 251050.
And what do these standards say about capacity?
Well, they define things like the installed capacity of storage, for example, often linked to subsidy rules like the EEG in Germany. But the source makes the point that, from a grid security perspective, these technologies are rather temporary power providers than a fundamental basis for supply security.
So the standards define what's there technically, but not necessarily what's reliably available for guaranteed supply when you need it most.
That seems to be the distinction the analysis is drawing, yes.
Okay, with all that context,
Yeah.
let's talk about the real-world cost. You mentioned curtailment shutting down usable power. What did that actually cost in Germany in 2024?
The figures presented in the source are pretty staggering, yeah. Taxpayers apparently paid around 553.94 million euros.
€500 million.
Roughly, for approximately 8,946 gigawatt hours of renewable electricity that was curtailed, generated but couldn't be used or transported.
Wow. And what does that work out to per unit of wasted energy?
If you average it out, it comes to about 61.9 of free CL per curtailed megawatt hour. Money paid for energy that never reached a consumer.
Okay, 8,946 gigawatt hours sounds like a lot. How does that compare to, say, Germany's total electricity needs?
Well, let's put it into perspective. If you take that total curtailed energy, 8,946,000 megawatt hours, and spread it evenly over the 8,760 hours in a year,
Okay.
you get an average power figure of about 1,021.92 megawatts. That's the average rate at which energy was curtailed throughout the year.
And how big is Germany's demand?
National demand in Germany can hit around 70 gigawatts or 70,000 megawatts at peak times, like midday.
So comparing the curtailed amount, that 1,021 megawatts, to the peak demand of 70,000 megawatts.
The curtailed amount represents only about 1.46% of that peak demand.
Only 1.5%. That seems surprisingly small, given the €500 million cost.
It does put it in perspective, doesn't it? Now, it's worth noting other sources sometimes give slightly different figures. Some suggest curtailed energy was maybe closer to 2.0 terawatt hours, which would be about 3% of total renewable generation, or maybe 0.4% of gross electricity consumption in 2024.
So there's some variation in the data.
As often happens with complex energy data. But regardless of the exact number, the cost is clearly significant, even if the percentage of total demand it represents isn't enormous.
Which leads, I guess, to the source's big question.
Exactly. The provocative question, is this effort appropriate or purposeful? And the blunt statement that follows, huge damage, little effect.
Is the cost justified by the outcome?
That's the question being posed. The analysis argues that grid fees and energy prices are actually rising, not despite, but because of the legally guaranteed, highly subsidized volatile energy converters. Because managing that volatility costs money.
And managing it can have other side effects, too.
Yes. Those redispatch measures, where grid operators have to intervene, telling some plants to ramp up, others down, to keep the grid stable when things are unbalanced,
Right.
they entail not only higher costs, but sometimes also higher CO2 emissions.
Higher CO2.
Well, if you have to curtail wind power because the grid is overloaded locally, but you still need power elsewhere, and the only available backup is, say, a gas or even coal plant, you might end up firing that up, leading to emissions that wouldn't have happened if the renewable energy could have been used.
Ah, I see. So fixing one problem sometimes creates another.
That's the complexity the source highlights.
Okay, so let's try to bring all this together. What do we actually learn about Schleswig-Holstein's power situation? Surplus or shortage?
Well, the bottom line from the analysis is this. In total, looking at the whole year, Schleswig-Holstein shows no supply shortage. They generate more than they use overall.
Big but.
They also have no reliable surplus in terms of local supply security. The power isn't always there when and where it's needed reliably.
So those big aggregated numbers, the TWO figures.
They are, as the source states, not suitable as a basis for decision-making. They hide more than they reveal about the operational reality.
And this leads to that key insight about backup power.
Exactly. This deep dive really underscores the point that the backup power plants are needed not instead of wind power, but because of wind power.
To fill the gaps when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining reliably.
Precisely. And the source points out that the planning for this necessary backup capacity seems to be missing, or at least lagging, in Schleswig-Holstein.
And the idea of just building more and more wind and solar, the much helps much approach.
The source argues that motto can be described as having failed. Why? Because, it claims, the complexity, nonlinearities, and availability of storage were underestimated. It's just not that simple.
And this isn't just some abstract technical debate, right? There are real economic consequences.
Absolutely. The source raises this point clearly. For a high-wage industrial country like Germany, if energy costs keep rising or supply becomes less reliable, it risks losing its competitive edge. That becomes a massive economic problem.
Okay. So given all these challenges and insights, what does Professor Water recommend? For policymakers, but also for us, for you, the listener.
He offers several key recommendations, really aiming for a more realistic and effective approach. Let's walk through them.
Great.
First, it's about avoiding misunderstandings. Tackling those commercial or political misinterpretations we talked about head-on. The focus should be on knowledge gain in the sense of enlightenment.
So understanding the physics and economics properly.
Yes, and taking a national economic perspective, looking at the bigger picture, rather than just individual business profitability from subsidies, for example.
Yeah, what's next?
Second, a call for holistic quality management. Basically, critically reviewing the last 20 years of the energy transition, the energy wind, using that check and act cycle from quality management.
Learn from what worked and what didn't.
Exactly. And integrating proper risk management, thinking about the risks to the whole national economy, not just specific projects.
Makes sense. And improving the tools we use, like that energy monitor.
Absolutely. That's the third point. Develop the energy monitor further. Improve the data validation. Fix things like that TARP error. Use the right parameters, maybe average power, kWh, instead of just accumulated energy kWh over intervals, and provide more holistic, integrated views.
And what about the core principles for planning the grid itself?
That's number 4. Prioritize the fundamentals. Economy, safety, availability, and redundancy. These need to be central to grid planning.
And this is where that particularly strong recommendation comes in.
Yes. And again, just to be very clear, we're relaying the viewpoint from the source material here. Professor Water explicitly recommends eliminate subsidies, centrally planned structures, trust the market.
Okay, a very clear market-oriented stance there. What else?
Also related to planning, realistically assess what storage can actually do. Avoid sham solutions, as he puts it. Acknowledge that storage is expensive, it has energy losses when you charge and discharge, and it can realistically only cover smaller short-term needs. It's not a magic bullet for large-scale fluctuations or the Dunkel flow.
Right, so manage expectations about storage.
Then 5th, sharpen the evaluation criteria we use. Move away from just looking at those simple annual kilowatt-hour balances.
Towards what?
Towards time-resolved energy flow analyses. Look at when energy flows, not just how much in total. And crucially, openly communicate the poor performance, meaning the low capacity factors of wind and photovoltaic plants. Consider that capacity factor reliably in all planning. Don't just assume nominal capacity.
Be honest about the limitations.
Seems to be the message. And finally, underpinning all of this is scientific integrity.
How so?
Uphold it as the foundation for trust. Reiterate that fundamental point. Physics will not follow political directives. Science has to guide the policy, not the other way around.
Wow. Okay, that was definitely a deep dive into the complexities behind the simple numbers. It really forces you to think differently about how we evaluate energy systems, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
As the source puts it quite wisely, good policy is not recognized by applause, but by its effect. So, thinking about all this, what really stands out to you, our listener, about that difference between just looking at the total energy produced versus considering when and where it's actually available and usable?
It's a fundamental shift in perspective, isn't it? And perhaps a necessary one. The source leaves us with another powerful thought. Some decisions are uncomfortable, but necessary. Maybe understanding these nuances, these complexities we've discussed today, might just change how you think about energy policy, about future planning, not just for places like Schleswig-Holstein, but maybe closer to home in your own communities too. Something to reflect on.